Everyone thinks the lesson of Universe 25 is that comfort kills, that abundance destroys, that a life without struggle is a life that collapses. That's not what the experiment actually showed. The real conclusion, the one sitting in Calhoun's own paper in his own words, is far stranger and far more relevant to right now. Let's start with what actually happened. In 1968, an American behavioral researcher named John Calhoun built what he called a paradise for mice. A 9-foot square enclosure with apartments stacked along every wall, mesh tunnels running floor to ceiling, water bottles that never ran dry, and food hoppers that never ran empty. No predators, no disease, no threats of any kind. He calculated the space could comfortably support 3,800 mice. He placed 8 founders inside and shut the lid. For the first 104 days, almost nothing happened. The mice explored, learned the geography, and established who slept where. Then the first litters arrived, and the population began to double every 55 days. By day 315, more than 600 animals were packed inside. And this is where things started to come apart. In a normal mouse colony, when the population outgrows the territory, the surplus mice leave. They find new ground somewhere else. Inside Universe 25, there was no new ground. The young males, with nowhere to go and no role to fill, began drifting into the center of the enclosure. They formed listless pools of bodies. They had no fights to win, no females to court, nothing to defend. They were healthy, well-fed, and completely purposeless. A second group formed at the opposite end of the spectrum, frantic, indiscriminate, moving faster than any other mice, forcing themselves into spaces that already had occupants, skipping every courtship ritual, refusing to be deterred even by violence. And then a third group emerged. Calhoun watched them with particular attention. He called them the beautiful ones. They never fought. They never tried to mate. They never engaged in any social activity at all. They ate, they slept, and they groomed themselves obsessively. Their fur was perfect because they had never been in a single conflict. They moved through the colony as if no other mouse existed. Externally, they looked like the healthiest animals in the entire enclosure. Functionally, they had opted out of the species entirely. On day 560, the population peaked at 2,200. It would never go higher. The last successful conception inside Universe 25 happened on day 920. After that, no new mice were born. The colony continued to age. The beautiful ones kept grooming, and one by one the mice died of old age, with no replacements coming up behind them. Now here is the part almost nobody talks about. When Calhoun's paper came out, the world ran with one reading: comfort kills. Abundance without struggle produces collapse. The image of the beautiful ones, perfect-looking and quietly extinct, became one of the most cited metaphors of the 20th century. Urbanists used it, politicians used it. Anyone who wanted to warn about modern decadence found something in those mice they could point to. But that was not Calhoun's conclusion. His actual conclusion was sitting in the paper the entire time. He wrote that the killer wasn't comfort, it wasn't abundance, it was the disappearance of meaningful roles. When the population grew faster than the number of roles the colony could offer, the mice with no place to fill stopped functioning. The fighters had no one to fight. The builders had nothing left to build. The young grew up with nothing they were expected to inherit. The social fabric that gave each individual mouse a reason to participate in the species simply evaporated. And without that fabric, the colony died. Not from scarcity, but from a surplus of individuals with nowhere to belong. Calhoun believed this had direct implications for human society. He wrote that for a species as complex as humans, a similar collapse was not just possible, it was logical. And he wrote that in 1973. Look at what has happened since. Birth rates across the developed world have been falling for decades, not because of scarcity, The developed world has never had more material abundance. Japan, South Korea, and large parts of Europe are facing demographic collapse in slow motion, driven not by poverty, but by a generation that has quietly decided not to participate in the continuation of the species. The explanation most commonly offered is economic. But the economics don't fully account for it. People in those countries have enough, more than enough. What they report lacking is something harder to name: purpose, belonging, a sense that their participation in society means something. Remote work, which accelerated dramatically in the early 2020s, produced something researchers did not predict. Productivity held up, output remained stable, but social cohesion fractured. The informal bonds that form in shared physical space, the accidental conversations, the visible struggles, the small acts of mutual recognition disappeared. And in their absence, people reported something that economists had no good metric for: a sense of not being needed anywhere in particular. Social media, which promised connection, produced isolation at scale, not because people stopped communicating, they communicate more than ever, but because the communication increasingly requires no real vulnerability, no real investment, no real role. You can consume without contributing. You can observe without participating. You can exist in a social environment without having any function within it. The beautiful ones groomed themselves obsessively in full view of a colony that had stopped requiring anything from them. The scrolling is very similar. And then there is the quiet epidemic that nobody has named directly yet. Across the developed world, a growing cohort of young men specifically has withdrawn from participation in the traditional markers of adult life: employment, relationships, civic engagement, reproduction. Researchers call it various things. The mechanism Calhoun identified is simpler. When the number of individuals who need a role exceeds the number of roles available, the surplus individuals stop trying. Calhoun himself was not a doomer. He spent the rest of his career not predicting the collapse, but trying to prevent it. He kept building new universes. He kept changing variables. He believed the way out for humans was what he called ideational generativity, the creation of new roles, new purposes, new reasons to participate that did not exist before. The way a society survives is not by reducing the number of people. It is by expanding the number of meaningful things people can do. The experiment is still sitting there in the data. 8 mice, a perfect world, 5 years, a complete extinction. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. What ran out was something nobody had thought to put in the paradise. Everyone thinks the lesson is that comfort kills. That's the comfortable reading. The real lesson is harder. A society doesn't collapse when people have too much. It collapses when people have nothing left to be needed for.